series for the 52 Living Ideas and the Greater Philadelphia Thinking Society. This is the third of 10 events we're hosting on Mary Shelley's masterpiece, Frankenstein. This event is focused on I've divided the novel into 4 parts. This is the third part, which I'm calling The Monster's Requisition. In the 1818 edition of the novel, it would be volumes 2, chapters 5 through 9, and volume 3, chapters 1 through 2. If you have the 1824 edition, which is identical to the 1818 except for division into volumes, it's volume 2, chapters 1 through 7. And if you're reading the 1831 edition, it's chapters 13 through 20. I invited folks to read the 1818 or 1824 edition in our first read through. We will finish the first read through in 2 weeks on the 18th, where we can discuss the whole novel. And then we're going to start in October rereading with the 1831 edition, which has several substantive edits by Mary Shelley. Conceptually, the part of the novel we're focused on today is from when the monster tells the story of the first 2 years of his life. We covered the beginning of the monster's story the creature's story last time, 2 weeks ago. This time we pick up with the arrival of Safie to the DeLacy's cottage, and Victor Frankenstein's, and it ends with Victor Frankenstein's solitary retreat to the Orkney Islands in Scotland to create a female companion for the creature he had created. I'm estimating 3 years earlier at the University of Ingolstadt. We have 2 years of the monsters created, and then there's 2 years where Victor stays on in Ingolstadt, and then it's unclear how much time passes, and then there's a 2-year period to build the female companion. Today's agenda, I'm going to give a brief synopsis. Then we're going to do participant readers' reflections and comments, inviting you to share your thoughts about this section of the novel in particular. Please, no spoilers. We're trying to focus on just the quarter of the novel for today's event, but of course you're going to want to bring in earlier parts of the novel. Then my plan is for a 30-minute breakout where either all of us or perhaps we'll break into 2 groups. We will discuss the novel, the portion of the novel in depth without the video recording. And then when we come back from breakout, there will be a group Q&A so that we can explore your questions as a group. My synopsis, this third of 4 parts of the novel, the conceit of the text, as you recall, is that the Arctic explorer Robert Walton has rescued Victor Frankenstein from an iceberg in the Arctic Ocean on his quest to the North Pole. The novel is actually a series of letters from Walton to his sister, Margaret Seville, in England. Victor's story, which is relayed in Walton's letters to his sister, tells of his youth in Geneva, his education in natural philosophy, which we now call science, his discovery of the principle of life, which he uses to create a creature who is so monstrous, Victor immediately eschews the creature, and he himself suffers a nervous breakdown of sorts. As part of his recovery, his family visits the valley of Chamonix, where the glacier Montanvert, which is now known by the name of the Mer de Glace, and Victor and the creature reunite on the glacier. The creature starts telling the story of his first 2 years of life. We pick up in the middle of the creature's story when Safie joins the cottagers who the creature is spying on in order to learn French and the ways of the world. Felix teaches Safie from the Comte de Volney's Ruins of Empires. We know from Walton's letters at the beginning that our story is dated 1700 something. But Volney's book, The Ruins of Empires, was published in 1791. So the astute reader can infer that the time frame or setting of the novel is the French Revolution, or maybe the mid or late part of the French Revolution, which began in 1789, and Wikipedia says ended in 1799. So that we get a finer date on the novel if you know your history of Volney's publication of Ruins of Empire. A key theme here is the creature's education, which the creature's education contrasts with the education of Victor. There's also in some of the letters at the beginning, the education of Walton, the education of Henry Clerval, and the education of Elizabeth, Victor's fiancée. We also get another installment in the section of the novel we read for this time of the criminal justice theme, as we learn how Felix rescued a Turk, Safie's father, from death row in a French prison. A key theme for this part of the novel is the creature's alienation. Everyone he meets rejects him. He finds his own reflection in a body of water, which we call a mirror. They had invented the mirror, but they still had the knowledge that before technology of mirrors, water served as a mirror. The creature looks at his reflection and thinks he's monstrous. The creature says, increase of knowledge only discovered to me more clearly what a wretched outcast I was. Then, let's see, the creature approaches the elder blind DeLacy, the family he's been getting his education from. And as he presents his case, DeLacy says, the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and curiosity. Nevertheless, the DeLacys reject the creature, and abandoned and forlorn, the creature sets out for Geneva to confront his maker, Victor Frankenstein. So he's alienated also from the DeLacys. Along the way, the creature rescues a girl fallen into a raging stream and gets shot in the shoulder for his trouble. Then he meets William Frankenstein, Victor's younger brother, and only after failing to kidnap him, quote unquote, silences him by grasping his throat, maybe a little too strongly. Is this murder? Then he asks Victor to make him a female companion. There's an intense dialogic exchange, and Victor in the end agrees. The travelogue motif in the novel returns as Victor, together with his friend Clerval, traveled to England on a 2-year adventure to create a female companion for the creature. Of course, Victor hasn't told Clerval his intentions, nor has he told anyone else what he's up to. For me, one of the surprising parts of the novel. During the travelogue, Victor breaks down and gives a eulogy for Clerval, who in the conceit of the novel is still living. Then they separate, Victor going to the Orkney Islands in Scotland to complete his work in creating the female companion. And that's where we leave the novel at the end of the reading for this session. So we don't know what happens after that. For anyone who wants to, I would invite you to put an exclamation point in a chat to indicate that you would like to speak about comments, reflections, observations, ideas, or interpretations for this part of the novel. One of my themes for this series is to hone in on the art of interpretation. I found 2 definitions of interpretation from another book called The Design Way. One of them is interpretation can be thought of as how the direct sensory experiences are filtered or focused by our perceptual lenses and ordered by our conceptual scaffolding. So it might be interesting to highlight what filtering and focusing we do in our interpretation. And the other definition of interpretation I liked from The Design Way is a picking and choosing of what is to be considered and in what way. So if anyone has any interpretations of the novel that you would like to share, what you considered and in what way you thought to consider it, that might be a fun reflection. I don't see anything in chat yet. Anyone? Oh, there's Doug. Great. I'm going to give a quick interpretation that I was thinking of, and maybe that'll stimulate someone else to put an exclamation point so that we can hear your comments, reflections, observations, ideas, and or interpretations. In one of my interpretations, this novel is so rich, I could meditate on it sort of all day if I had nothing else to do in life. There are just so many directions you could go with it. But the one I wanted to share is how Mary Shelley explores how a person is created. We had the creature created in the second part of the novel. But now through the creature's story, he asks, who was I? What was I? Whence did I come? What was my destination? And to me, this invites us as readers to think about and interpret how a human being, a character, a person, not just a body, is created. And in interaction with the blind DeLacy, where he expresses this interest in companionship with the DeLacys, and then how he wants a female companion. This urge for companionship, and that our personhood. What I heard in the novel, my interpretation by juxtaposing those elements, was how our personhood is created by our social relations, and an estranged creature who has no social relations, who's rejected by the DeLacys, who's rejected by his creator, is totally alienated. And the novel, in one interpretation, is exploring that. So, Doug, first, let me again invite anyone who wants to share comments, reflections, observations, ideas, or interpretations. Please put an exclamation point in chat and share your reflections on primarily this part of the novel. Please try to avoid spoilers for the ending. But, if you want to talk about the beginning of the novel, that's fine too. Doug, go ahead, your thoughts. Doug, can you unmute? You're muted. Joe, is it our fault or?
Let me check that. Could be.
Oh no, he just got kicked out. So another rolling blackout in California. He'll be back momentarily. In the meantime, Joe, what are your thoughts?
Well, I like what you talked about. I mean, I think that this is a key moment where the DeLacys are, he's interacting with them, and that yes, we're formed by our social relations, and this is the first opportunity for him to interact with other people in a meaningful way. Ultimately, he was rejected by them, but still, I think it's being able to talk to the blind man, and I love the quotes that you actually called out, that kind of depict about how, and I think it's how we treat people in general that are different. To be quite honest, and I think this was brought up during one of the first videos that you guys had covered as well. I think the monster's education as well in this process is fascinating as well, and there's a bit of self-discovery that went on during this part of the book. As far as I'm trying to make a relationship with the design way. I think I might come back for that, but I think that this is a pivotal moment in the book where he's actually interacting with the DeLacys, and then actually, Victor Frankenstein's travels as well. But we can get into that. Those are just my initial comments. I might have some more in a little bit.
Okay. Doug, welcome back. Your comments and thoughts on this section.
It kicks me out about every 6 to 8 minutes, so maybe I'll try to make this brief. There are two things I wanted to share, and it relates a little bit to the design way thing, but I think it's a counterpoint to it. With the Romantics, there's this belief that there's a very direct relationship of pleasure between the eye and light and form and color. They even talk about that, form and color, and unmediated by thought. I mean, that actually says that at some point. And so this idea that the Romantics had, that nature really informed you in some very emotional way and very much in the feelings. And this is before thought enters the picture. And when the creature develops, he has a primary joy in what he sees and smells and hears. And when he really can begin to think about things, he starts to overinterpret, misinterpret, have a violent interpretation, or do something else away from the sort of pure love and pleasure of life, the pure curiosity. I mean, the other interesting thing in this is how long it takes him to get to Scotland to work on the Creatures Request, and where it becomes a real travelogue, where he's just like, you know, and it's almost like he keeps talking about he's worried that the monster or the creature, which he sees as a monster, might attack his friend who he's traveling with, or might attack the people he's left behind. And so the longer he procrastinates, the more he's putting all those people in danger. He sort of says, I got to do this to free myself and the people I love. And then he takes months and months and months, like 2 months here, 3 months there, traveling and dabbling and trying to avoid dealing with what he has to deal with. So that to me is just fascinating. And he seems to have what today is called an incel's approach, that both the monster and the creature and the creator both have. Unrequited love leads to anger and rage and fury. And I mean, it's really interesting sort of insight she has in the male psyche, that these guys, if they don't get what they want, and she has monster men to sort of study in her father and her husband and Lord Byron. So that to me, those three things are interesting. Her insight into the male psyche, good and evil, and the travelogue that delays the work he has to do to protect himself and the people he loves. He's really flirting with his shadow. And then this sort of, that idea that there's an immediate connection between the eye and form and color is how it's compared. It's without thought coming later.
Thank you. I've been really taken by the travelogue. I like, part of me wants to just go to Europe and see all these places for myself. So someone should organize a Frankenstein travelogue vacation getaway.
Me too. I felt the same thing. She even says if you travel a lot, you get addicted to it. You get used to these pleasures, and you have to move to find more pleasure, in your travels. You have to keep moving, Just sort of what Poe says about poetry. You're easily exhausted by poetry, and so you need a rest. You need to taste something else.
Jeannie and then Madeline.
Well, what I wanted to say was, wouldn't it be interesting to have a sequel with the DeLacy's, and they come for Frankenstein and they say, oh, we're so sorry, please, we're going to help you. We'll take you back. And, see how that would play out. I mean, the DeLacy's were kind of outcasts themselves. I mean, the father was completely dependent. That's a kind of handicap that if he's not taken care of in our society, you can end up in a very, very bad place pretty easily. But so his kids were kind enough to be taking care of him, so they would be the exemplar of the caring people who are, reaching out to him. Of course, it was their own dad, but reaching out to handicapped people and helping them, and yet they could not accept the monster. And so this was, your outcast from outcast. I mean, Felix was wanted. I mean, he was I think, wasn't he? He was a criminal in exile or whatever. And, his new wife was a foreigner, who was really not welcome there. And, these are to be outcast by the outcasts. I mean, that's the lowest of the low. So it really drives home how nobody took him in. And oh, even the kid, you know, the little Frankenstein, William.
William.
Oh my goodness, what an attitude that kid had. I mean, he was right away, you know, trying to, you know, prove himself better than the ugly monster. And, you know, it just really, if your kid acted that way in this day and age, you know, you'd have to tell it not to, that was wrong, you know, because you don't treat people like that. You don't, you know, make fun of them or, you know, say terrible things about them. So, you know, it shows a being who is really on the outs in our world.
Complete alienation. And what's the meaning of that? You know, what to be completely alienated is you know, does anyone have any way to interpret that? If you have any thoughts on this or anything else, please put an exclamation point in chat. Madeline, your thoughts.
Yes, okay, thanks, CJ. Let's see, well, I had actually marked a section. Okay, so first of all, there's a definite plot hole in this section, which is, why does he need to go get additional instruction in order to make a mate for the creature? So that was sort of just not explained, but he has to do it. I don't know why, but it doesn't say anywhere. I too was struck by a couple of things Doug had mentioned. One was the alternation of grief and anger. When he's rejected by the DeLacy's, he says, "My protectors had departed and had broken the only link that held me to the world. For the first time, the feelings of revenge and hatred filled my bosom, and I did not strive to control them. But allowing myself to be borne away by the stream, I bent my mind towards injury and death. When I thought of my friends, of the mild voice of DeLacy, the gentle eyes of Agatha, and the exquisite beauty of the Arabian, these thoughts vanished, and a gush of tears somewhat soothed me." So he basically is alternating between grief and anger. And unable to injure anything human, I turned my fury towards inanimate objects. As night advanced, I placed a variety of combustibles around the cottage. And then he burns the cottage down, which again is a very quick action section. That paragraph and the one where he burns the cottage, they're very short. I also had noticed what she'd said about travel. He's talking about Clerval. He says, "A traveler's life is one that includes much pain amidst its enjoyments. His feelings are forever on the stretch, and when he begins to sink into repose, he finds himself obliged to quit that on which he rests in pleasure for something new, which again engages his attention, and which also he forsakes for other novelties." But I think that really the central theme of this section that we read is mating. We have Victor's father calling him in for a heart-to-heart talk. Are you unhappy because you don't want to marry Elizabeth? No, father, I love her. I do want to marry her. And then he just gets going on his usual lies. "Oh, but I just need, a couple of years of a bit of a grand tour and then I'll be back." So there's that. Then there are all the stories within the stories that involve Sophie, which is also a couple getting together story. So within Walton's letters to his sister, there's Victor's narrative. There is the creature's narrative, then the creature of himself, then the creature's narrative of the family at the cottage. And then he's talking about Sophie's letters and how she, so I think we're about 5 levels in, and how much she wants to marry a Christian man because she will have more freedom than she would in the haram, I believe they call it in the book, the harem. Then we get to the part where the creature quite reasonably says, I too would like a mate. And Victor, who has just, you know, sort of clinched his own prize with Elizabeth and heard the story of the son and Sophie, now like, what? No, what a terrible idea. So he's pursued not just by his creation, but also by his lies. As he goes into Scotland, and then he tells Clerval, oh, I need to be by myself for a while. I'm going to go up, you know, to the Outer Hebrides, or no, the Orkneys, that's where he goes. And gets this hut that's nasty, brutish, and short.
Thank you, Madeline. Joe, go ahead.
No, I think I just wanted to pick up on something that both, yeah, I mean, that Doug and Madeline had mentioned, is this idea that how Victor Frankenstein lies not only to other people but to himself during this you know, this journey. Like, he's essentially you know, it's taking 2 years to essentially to put together a mate that's going to potentially save the lives of people that he's closest to, and he continually, yeah, I mean, he seems to be, he's lost people already due to his lies. You know, he's already lost close family members, and you know that he still continues to I don't know, it seems like this is not a priority to him. It's almost as if his life is predestined to be awful, and so is the monsters. I mean, and it's kind of puzzling. That's all. Just it's puzzling to see some of his behaviors. That's all.
Yeah. Why doesn't he take on any confidants? None of his professors at Ingolstadt, you know, hey, professor, you know, I did this and I'm like not sure what to do next.
He's as isolated as the monster.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reality is that I think this is I mean, partly this is a story about a lot of things about, you know, gender and but also just social isolation, and what it does to oneself. You know, lies of omission and things along those lines, how they can actually, you know, lead to your own demise. But anyway, just a thought.
Anyone else with thoughts? Bob, Mike, we haven't heard from you. Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
Well, I have, and I think it's just the way I approach science fiction, even if it is old science fiction from several hundred years ago, is that I think I've mentioned this once before. I look for reasons behind things. Maybe I'm just trying to poke holes in some parts of the story. I came sort of very, I thought, subtly put. I'm going to read it here. I approached her unperceived and placed a portrait in one of the folds of her dress. And I just thought, how is this 8-foot creature approaching unperceived and doing anything, much less sneaking the portrait in her dress, which was just I just thought it was a plot line so that later when she is accused of the crime, she has the one piece of evidence in her belonging. And such features is how does he learn language so well? And I was curious, is he speaking French and English? He reads Paradise Lost, not a little trivial novel, and is able to, I guess, understand various features of the novel. His intellect, it seems to be, the creature seems to be extraordinary, and yet he falls apart every time he thinks of himself and what he looks like, and how that makes him such a horrible being. He's a horrible being because he starts killing people or leading to the death of people, but I have trouble seeing him as a horrible being purely because of the manner in which he was created. That's all.
Thanks, Bob. Go ahead, Madeline.
Okay, yeah, well, Bob, I'm so glad you brought up the topic of his reading. My general impression is that they're all Francophone. They're all French speaking, and he's learning other languages through the agency of Sophie learning languages. And I thought it was quite interesting. I'm just looking for the part which now I've lost. The chapter where he's talking about the different books that they read. And there were, here we are. Okay, so the creature's observing the family. He finds clothes and books. So there's Paradise Lost, there's Plutarch's Lives, and The Sorrows of Young Werther. He also finds Victor's journal of his own creation. So basically, it seems to be a sort of recapitulation of human history. There are the feelings, there are ethics. So feelings would be The Sorrows of Young Werther. Ethics would be probably something Paradise Lost, religion. And then there is history and learning all about empires and how everything works, and virtuous people, that would be Plutarch's Lives. So I thought it was a very interesting way to show how the monster could be so sophisticated about in his thinking, which is that he sort of went from 0 to 60, learning language, learning spoken language, learning to read, and these are the books he learned to read on.
Thanks, Madeline. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Well, just because he says he can speak doesn't mean he sounds really good, because he probably sounds like a monster, sort of like, you know, I mean, it doesn't really say it, but you'd think he didn't have much practice or anything. So probably when he's talking to Victor up on top of the glacier, he's probably saying the words, you know, like how it is where you can read a word, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're good at saying it, you know. So that's probably would make his recitation to Victor a little bit, you know, more dramatic, I'd say.
I think Bob has a good point that learning language in barely over a year, especially if you don't get any feedback with your speaking of that language, that just seems very implausible to me. But last 2 weeks ago, Doug, you mentioned the monster as sort of the creature, I should say, as a Superman, and maybe that's the motif that Mary Shelley is trying to evoke. That, you know, Victor did a really good job creating this creature, with the one exception of he made him ugly and too big. You know, I don't know how, what the, Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, Jeannie, I sort of think the part is Hollywood talking. That's how, whether it's the original Frankenstein monster or even in a sense Mel Brooks monster. The type of sounds, that's the way that I think we've all been brought up with. But here he expresses himself, even if we have no idea, at least I have no idea how he sounds. I don't know if it's ever brought out what he sounds like.
Okay, I think we should go into, oh, Doug wants to say something. Go ahead, Doug.
Just on the sound of his voice, on the second reading through, or I mean, I have to read this a number of times to pick up things, but he says the sound of his voice is rough, but it's not as offensive as his visual impression made on people. It's that primary reaction.
Oh,
You muted.
You-
You're
you got-
muted. You muted yourself.
I don't know how I did that. I wasn't even touching the computer. I mean, it's interesting, given the connection between the eye and form and color, that it seems to be an immediate revulsion that people have through their eye and what they see of him, that there's no thought involved. It's just, this is terrible, this is horrible. So
His size has to have something to do with that, though, too.
yeah, his size does, but there's something else about him that they don't go into detail. I think there's some hint that it might be the veins, that his skin might be translucent, so the veins and muscles are very visible. There's some hint of that. But he says his voice is weird, but not as offensive as his visual impact. There's something rough about his voice.
Mike, you've got your hand up. What would you add?
Well, probably a question rather than a comment. I got the impression that people talked to him and on a few occasions, and he conversed with people without very much trouble at all until he got rough. But he saw his reflection in a pool of water, and that was really the before he became a criminal, so to speak. And that was the first thing that his self-realization that he was ugly. I don't know if that I have a thorough enough impression to say that, but based on my recollection, that's what my interpretation of him. He was accepted by society until he became a criminal and started killing people.
What do you?
No, the DeLacy's were the first people that he met, and he was always in hiding from them. And he finally came out. The first person he did talk to after, he was spying on them, which is really creepy. But when he finally did speak to somebody, it was to the old man who was blind.
Right.
And the old man treated him pretty okay, not 100% really. I mean, he was really scared at first, but so that he was never accepted by people. And everywhere he went before that, he had to find clothes. But I mean, I guess when he was first out there naked, everybody was throwing stuff at him and chasing him and stuff like that. Didn't he go from place to place?
Yeah. Okay. Joe, I think what I'm going to do, there aren't enough participants to do 2 breakout rooms.
No.
So I think what I'm going to do is like I did last time, I'll just pause the recording.
Sure.
Oh, you're doing that?
I can do it.
I can do it. I've got it right here.
Okay.
Okay, Zoom recording.
This meeting is being recorded.
So we're back from our breakout, and we do a Q&A. And so our first step might be to collect questions. Does anyone have a question they'd like us to grapple with in the Q&A? Exclam in chat, or you could raise your hand. Madeline.
Yes, well, I guess it is. Why does this work continue to resonate 200 years after its first publication? What do people think about why it's kept going for so long when other things of its time have dropped away and no one ever thinks of them?
Thank you. Joe, your question.
Basically, what is the ultimate role of what is Mary Shelley saying about science? I mean, that's essentially what I'm trying.
Thank you, Joe. Jeannie?
Well, this one might go with Joe's, and it's why does Victor, with all he's got, I mean, he was brought up so nicely, you know, with a lot of love, and you know, he has his family, they all love him, and you know, a lot of support. Why does he fail so badly in terms of, you know, his judgment of, I mean, he doesn't listen to other, you know, he was told, don't do this, you know, don't study those people, and yet he did it. And I mean, I think, you know, he keeps it a secret because he's embarrassed. He realizes that this is, you know, he's somehow done something really bad. But how come he ends up being such a bad person, you know, when he's got everything going for him?
I formulated a couple questions. One was, in this section in particular, at the very beginning, there were a bunch of racist, Eurocentric, elitist statements. Was that too distracting? Do those kinds of racist, elitist things need trigger warnings 200 years later? Or I decided not to highlight that this time, and I'm wondering. And another question I had was, Safie is kind of the exotic, beautiful other. The creature is the hideous, monstrous other. How can we interpret the other in the novel? How would you interpret the creature's estrangement from everyone he meets, the villagers, the DeLacy's, the rustic in the woods who shoots him, William as an unprejudiced child who's extremely prejudiced against the creature, and Victor is, you know, prejudiced against his creation from the moment he creates them. but not the moment before he creates them. So Bob, you've got a question. Go ahead, Bob.
A question I have is, what would we think of the story of Frankenstein were it not to have been taken on by more modern culture, by the movies, which my guess is people know of Frankenstein primarily because of the movies in Hollywood, just generalizing. And in my own mind, though, I had read Frankenstein years ago and I've subsequently forgotten everything I had read. Now I don't need years to forget. I can do it in 10 minutes. And so what is it that we would be thinking of, how even just reading the story, but without having that basis of the movies and the interpretation that goes there? Does that force us or cause us to think any differently? Like, I'd like to be curious or find a bunch of people who never saw the movies, and that includes Young Frankenstein. In some way, that even includes Shrek, which is sort of an updated child's version of a monster story. So that's just my question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I captured that. Did you? How we can someone summarize Bob's question? Did no one?
Yeah.
Here, let me try
Doug,
it again.
Doug,
Would anybody pay attention to the book if it hadn't been for the movie? I think that's the heart of what he's asking. But it's more layered than that.
How would we even have interpret the book, having grown up in a culture where the movie, I think at least, the movies take precedence over the last nearly 100 years.
Okay. I'm feeling I'd like to focus on the text a little more. So let's see. We've got Madeline's "Why Does Frankenstein Resonate 200 Years Later?" Do we want to? Yeah, maybe we can go through that one. My answer is that it's just such a richly juxtaposed, evocative. Every paragraph is so dense with suggestions and ideas. The text is dynamic and alive. Anyone else wanna? Jeannie, go ahead.
I think it's a total analogy for what we're doing, in terms of, say, climate change and the destruction of the environment. Because, here you have somebody that's basically intending to do something great, really do something, top of the line. This is going to be great. And yet it ends up being a big mess. And we, our society is like Victor, we're just going forward and creating something that's it's far more tragic than Mary Shelley even imagined. So I think this is totally apropos to, what we're doing in our everyday lives in terms of our society. We are just stupid in terms of realizing what we're doing.
That's what makes the novels so alive. I thought I saw a couple hands up and they disappeared. Doug,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think I raised the wrong hand. Just to deal with what Bob raised, we did bring this up a session or two ago, that at the end we will try to evaluate how the movie has made or broken the book. And I think there are certain things, both in Jekyll and Hyde and in Frankenstein, both stories that would live on their own. But I think that's something we're tabling till the end to figure out, why Hollywood ruined the book in the way that it did and stopped more significant debate and just turned it into a terror movie, which is what they do with Jekyll and Hyde too. There are all kinds of psychological implications in Jekyll and Hyde that the movies never touch
on. Bob, did you have your hand up for a second, or did you want to jump in here?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Jeannie, go ahead.
Well, I think it feeds into the way we really do act. In terms of like William, screaming, ugly monster, get away from me. This is how we really are. So I think it's the movies show that, and I think that is a truth that comes through from the book, through the movie, and we really are like that. And the fact that it goes even to the costume, because you have the Frankenstein costume which exists beyond the movie, and if you put that on, people are supposed to be scared of you, and we do react that way. We react with fear when we see something ugly. This is true.
So it touches this primal sense. Joe's question, what is Mary Shelley saying about science? I think the science part of the novel is the first of our 4 segments. So I'm thinking we can say more about that at the first event in October. This part of the novel, unless anyone saw otherwise, I didn't see any real clues about Mary Shelley's dialogue with science.
Not in this part. Not in this part.
Not in this part. So Jeannie wants to jump in.
What about the procrastination? I mean, because he realizes he's about to do something even worse than he's already done. Because this, if he makes the female, this could be a reproduction thing. There could be many of these. It's one thing to build the first model, but it's another thing what he's about to do. So the fact that he's procrastination, he feels so guilty and hesitant about doing what he feels, yet he feels compelled. He's got a sort of flaky reason to do it. The monster told me to do it, or else he's going to kill everybody. He could get around that if he really felt like he wanted to, but he's going on, and he's both compelled and afraid to do it.
Mike, what are your thoughts?
I'm marching to the beat of a different drummer. I would have taken this as an opportunity to repair the monster, B, to instead of having him having created him, he might they could have matched him up with, like Beauty and the Beast, with somebody who nursed him back to health, helped him to learn how to read another 5 languages, and given him and made him a boon to science, plus the ability, like biblical Lazarus, of bringing other people back to life, and creating an early insubstantiation of organ transplant, and all those problems that were solved could have created a new concept of humanity, and created a new vision for human life and habitat, artificial limbs, All kinds of things were possible. Instead of having him dig up bodies to make a woman, he could have he could have said, "How about this? We'll make you beautiful, and we'll make you We'll make you 10 feet tall and with the strength, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound type person." And that's the kind of story I would write.
Okay, Jeannie.
For Mary Shelley, it seems like there is no redemption. So the monster, the creature, has already killed. So once he's killed, I mean, they just executed anybody that was a murderer. So I don't know if he has a chance for redemption. He's got to be on the run from now on, I think.
Well, they're murderers that got together, that get out of trouble every day and get elected to political office without any complaint.
Doug, go ahead.
One of the things I mean, I got dumped out when you were talking about science, but one of the most frustrating things for me is that this whole section is aimed at London because of the scientists who can consult there on the latest developments that might illuminate what he's doing. And then she completely drops that. That to me seems like an odd hole, another hole in the book, that she really sets that up as the destination of the pilgrimage to the great scientists of London, and then she just drops it, you know.
Did he end up in London? Did he end up in Scotland because he intended to go to Scotland, or did he? I recall that he got into a storm and lost his sails and had to make sails out of his own clothes.
That's not in this part.
Okay.
No, but he's going to visit a friend in Scotland.
Clerval or I forget, has
One of
this
them.
friend in Scotland, and that leads them to Scotland. And then Victor decides, I guess for dramatic effect, but he hasn't confided in Clerval what he's up to. So, you know, how do you create a creature? Oh, my dear friend Clerval, come in, come in. Oh, what's that on the floor over there? Well, let's not talk about that. I mean, you know, it's a little embarrassing how you can do this without utter privacy. And not tell anyone about it, and not have anyone know about it. Madeline, your thoughts?
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how Robert Walton judges him when we go back to the frame story later on.
Right.
Because at first, Walton is like, "Oh, thank you, Lord. You have sent a cultured man for me to talk with." Someone of my own class. But after hearing all this, what's he going to be like? Is he going to be like, "Oh yeah, I get it, I understand. You know, you did what you had to do, you're still one of us"? Or is he going to be like, "Wow, this man is really morally repellent. I took better care of the crew on my ship than he did of the being that he created"?
Okay, Jeannie.
Yeah, I think I forget now what's going to happen, but for some reason, when I first read this, I mean, without thinking too deeply about this, I wasn't really thinking about how Victor failed. He's sort of the hero, and he's meant as the kind of a good guy. And I always felt sympathetic toward him, I think, throughout the whole book. That was when I read it, you know, back in the past, just on my own. And it's only now that I'm thinking, you know, he's the monster and all that kind of stuff. I think at the first read, you accept that the monster is hideously ugly and he's a monster, and it just, you know, that's the way it is. And there's nothing good about him. I don't know. For some reason, that was the impression I got just from reading it. And that sort of comes through in the movie too, I think, where Victor doesn't really, he's not the one that's morally failing. It's the monster's just ugly.
Any other thoughts on why Victor turned out so bad? Do we have any clues in this section?
There's one point where he himself says, "My father never set any limits on me. He gave me complete freedom to do whatever I wanted." And then I realized, well, maybe that's why he has no ability to like criticize himself, or no sense of self-criticism, because his father just loved him too much.
Right. I almost thought
that he's spoiled, basically. No. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Maybe Shelley is critiquing that liberal educational philosophy. You know, one of my attempts at interpreting the novel is through the educational philosophy. You've got at the very beginning in some of the early letters the education of Walton. You have at the beginning of the novel the education of Victor, first in his childhood, and then at Ingolstadt, where he spends 2 years becoming this accomplished chemist. Then he spends the next 2 years creating a monster, and things go off the rails. And it's like, okay, what did Mary Shelley tell us about the educational philosophy? Maybe it is that it was too liberal. Maybe, you know, but she argues so passionately for that liberal education. And, you know, but one could try to interpret the novel in those terms and try to pick and choose considerations and put them together into an interpretation. I'm not sure how that would turn out right now.
It might be that education is too liberal and doesn't have the spirit of anarchy that both her father and mother had in their educational theories. That idea that it's like Bucky in a way, that kids are natural born engineers, they'll figure it out. But if you have a liberal, this is good for you kind of approach, or, you know, I don't know, I'm still wrestling with that. And maybe that'll come clear at the end, but
maybe Mary Shelley wrestled with it, and all she could do is use her artistic sentiments to put in clues, and the novel may not speak explicitly to it, but the novel has the clues of the author that we can then use to form our own interpretations that may or may not find much support in the novelist. One of the videos I watched says that Mary Shelley's papers have been preserved, a lot of her letters and notebooks and journals. So someone could, and I believe, you know, I know that people have looked into, you know, read Mary Shelley's journals and try to figure out and infer different things. But we're just reading the novel, so all we have is the clue of the novel at this point.
I believe it's better to go to the novel than the biography. But the biography here is very interesting because both Shelley and Lord Byron worshipped her father as sort of a fountainhead of brilliant social philosophy. So that's a very weird nest for her to bring out this particular work. But, well, you know, you have to look at the work itself, I think.
So there's a question. If someone knew her father's theory of education, did Victor get that approach to education, or did Victor get a mistaken version of it? Well,
Oh,
Madeline's
Madeline's
got,
hand's up, but I have a response that might be worth
Yeah,
it. Madeline's
say-
hand is up.
why don't you save it? Madeline, go ahead.
Oh, no, Doug, you go ahead.
I think I forgot what I was going to say. So go ahead and it'll come back.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking about, reading the book on its own without knowing who she was. I believe that the 1818 printing was printed without her name on it. It had no author. And so it had its own success. I mean, I'm sure people in her circle knew who wrote it, but any place else it sold, they probably wouldn't. And it wasn't until I think the 1823 edition that she put her name on the cover. So that first batch of readers, they weren't busy psychologizing the author and reading into the novel from the author's life, as I've been tending to do throughout.
Doug?
I do remember what I was going to say. I listened to, and it's the other version, so I stopped listening to it. Partway into it, I realized it's the later version. But Simon Vance, a great British actor, has done a recording of Frankenstein, and it is so good. And the letters are really interesting because there seems to be almost a mock heroism in the language that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to north, and I'm going to do great things. That seems to be almost sort of a facade of colonialism, that then the story kind of blows up in a way, that this heroic ideal. And there's something and it's not that he overdoes it, but there's something very simple in the way Simon Vance approaches the language. And I never picked that up in any other reading before, that there's a sort of male bravado of, I am the great explorer of the world. I will conquer the world with my knowledge. And that I think the book kind of turns much darker than the letters that are sent that introduce the novel. And it's like, that's a kind of 18th century enlightenment. I will solve the world's problems. And it's run over by this romantic Sturm und Drang, just like obliterated. So I think I'll be very curious. I've forgotten by the end, where that guy falls in his judgment of Frankenstein, because at my age, all novels are new again. They're always like new when I read them.
So maybe it's more the imperial attitude of science and the imperial attitude of exploration. They called it the exploration and discovery of America, which of course was fully inhabited at the time. But this maybe it wasn't the educational philosophy, but the imperial attitude of it. And I wonder if Mary Shelley's father's educational philosophy critiqued imperialism, or if it was, I don't know. Why is the creature so alienated? This issue of the other, which Doug raised and I raised, Safi, the exotic, beautiful other, the creature is a hideous, monstrous other. The quote I think I gave at the beginning talked about, no, it's here. If I find it. No, I'm not going to find it. The elder blind DeLacy says, the hearts of men, when unprejudiced by any obvious self-interest, are full of brotherly love and charity. Can we bridge the gap to the other, is Arnold Weinstein's way of putting it. Any thoughts about alienation and the other, especially in this section of the novel? How I looked at the juxtapositions with the social connections of the DeLacy's, Victor and Clerval, Victor and Elizabeth, these social connections, and then the creature who has no, no one, everyone who sees him just immediately rejects him. Joe.
No, I just find it interesting that I think this is kind of one of the main themes of the book in general is actually just demonstrating what it's like to be isolated and giving it through the experience of a creature. I mean, this is what I mean, you're torn because the way the creature, and I forget who mentioned that the creature all of a sudden has these moments where you can kind of you're in touch and you kind of feel for what he's going through, but at the same time he's killing people. So you're kind of torn a little bit, but I think ultimately this is about what happens when you ostracize somebody. That their reaction, their emotions, and it's odd. There's a element, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, about social isolation all around. But with the creature, it's a little bit different. It's done strictly based on appearance. And the inability to communicate as well. And I think that's I think that's one of the main themes that Mary Shelley is trying to communicate here is this is what happens when you isolate any individual based on appearances or treating another group like that. Or even another gender differently. So anyway.
Jeannie, go ahead.
It's sort of from the woman's perspective, if you have a child, then it could turn out to be a monster. And so this is something a fear that women would have all the time, that you don't know what's going to happen when you give birth to something.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to explore that more?
I
Go ahead,
find it
Doug.
interesting that there's a double-edged sword to isolation or solitude or the loneliness, which can be most dramatic when the creature is close to society and people and he feels it. But both the creature and the creator go into solitude to heal themselves at times. So they can just stare at nature and lie and look at the stars. And that seems to heal the creature at one point. And so his self-isolation is a gradual process. He sort of keeps wanting to give humanity a break, much like God in the Jewish scriptures. Okay, maybe I'll forgive them. No, they're not worth it. Maybe I will. No, they're not worth it. And then there's a decision, I'm just going to destroy them all, and that to me is sort of, it's a process. And even then, if he gets what he wants, he'll isolate himself in South America. Oh, that's the other thing. He's a vegetarian. I didn't get that until this time through, that he's not as bad as humans because he doesn't eat flesh. He actually says that at one point, which slipped by me the first couple of times I read this section. Anyway, that's all. But the solitude, the loneliness destroys and angers and enrages, but the solitude and nature kind of heals and is a source of creativity.
And estrangement is more than loneliness. It's being rejected and
Exile.
Exile. and she mentions Dante in here with the iron cowls, the canto of hypocrites. Where was that? Yeah, of course. There are too many pages and you got to flip through. Anyone else? Joe, your hand's still up. Did you
Oh,
have
sorry.
more to add?
No.
Dante hovers over this in the sense that of pilgrimage and a journey, and that maybe that's why there's so much journeying, that the journey itself is a psychological exploration. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
I haven't read Paradise Lost. Does Paradise Lost also have journeying?
Not quite in the same way that from my memory. What shocked me and what Harold Bloom writes about in his essays on Paradise Lost is how much it has a kind of, particularly around Satan, a science fiction kind of feel, a kind of very futuristic style, which disappears when he's talking about Adam and Jesus and that. It's all very staid and but Satan, it's like there's a soaring energy to Satan, which I think had a huge influence on the Romantic poets and that kind of futuristic kind of writing almost. I think Harold Bloom, I had the feeling when I read it, but then Harold Bloom talks about that having this sort of, but I don't know if it's there's a journey, there's a fall from heaven to hell and then a climb back up. So it's a little bit, maybe, I'm wondering how Milton was influenced by Dante.
You would think so.
But certainly in the book we started with, the La Vita Nuova, that's a pilgrimage. Pilgrimage keeps popping up repeatedly in that book. The pilgrim and what he knows, what he sees, that he journeys out and then has to journey back away from the beloved city to the beloved person, back to the beloved city of the beloved person. And that's what Frankenstein does. He keeps going out to the fringe of the world and coming back, and up to the mountaintop and coming back. Ibsen sort of picks that up too. People who climb the mountain and are destroyed in an avalanche.
Jeannie, did you have something to add? Dante's iron cowl. The promise I had made to the demon weighed upon my mind like Dante's iron cowl on the heads of the hellish hypocrites. That's a reference to Dante's Inferno 23. Does the reference to hypocrites mean anything here, or is it just the weighing of Dante's iron cowl?
I mean, maybe I don't know, maybe how foreigners are accepted to a certain degree with Southie, and I don't know. It's still a creature. It's hard. I don't know. I'm thinking out loud. Never mind.
Jeannie, go ahead.
Now I remember what it was. So one of the things in Paradise Lost is this, well, obviously the desire to get back to the original Garden of Eden, which, we supposedly came from. And I think even for Mary Shelley, they didn't have the same problems that we have right now. But, the way human beings acted, the way things were going was not good. We were definitely on a bad track. And I think, to create this new thing, the hopes would be that this would be like the new Adam, that this would be something that's more perfect than us, and that all our failings, could be rectified with something new. And I think in Paradise Lost also, you know, shows that that is impossible, and also in this that the new creation isn't going to be the answer for how we get back to the garden.
Any other thoughts on the creature's alienation, the journey to the other, the resonance of the novel, the
The hypocrisy is. I had a comment on the hypocrisy because I think Frankenstein is a hypocrite in so many ways. You know, he doesn't say anything about the trial, and yet he's so freaked out that she's executed. He doesn't ever come out and tell people what he's done until he's out in the Arctic. He delays getting to the work of creating the helpmate for the creature, endangering himself and his family and everyone. But the creature lives up to his thing. He says, I'll wait until you do it, and I'll show up when you've done it, or you're getting close to it. And the creature seems to have more integrity than Frankenstein.
Mm.
One other thing that struck me was the role of Orientalism in the novel. In the previous section, you know, we read 2 weeks ago, Clerval is studying Oriental literature at Ingolstadt with Victor's help. And here in this section, we get this ugly racist critique of Turks, with the father betraying Felix, not giving his daughter. What kind of complicated vision of the Orient is Mary Shelley presenting in the novel? Did that thread strike anyone, or maybe it's too subtle?
I don't have any comment.
Yeah. Well, maybe we're coming to an end then. Does anyone have any final thoughts on this? The Creatures Requisition. I just saw my list of themes. Creating a person, the mutual bonds of human relationship. I said there was a good quote on that. Did I read it yet? In the first chapter for this time, near the end of it, the creature is explaining the lessons he learned. Other lessons were impressed upon me. I heard of the difference of sexes, the birth and growth of children, and all the various relationships which bind one human being to another in mutual bonds. But where were my friends and relations? No father had watched my infant days. No mother had blessed me with smiles and caresses. Or if they had, all my past life was now a blot. What was I?
Sad.
Yeah.
It really is.
It's powerful too.
It's very powerful. I mean, you know, the one interesting thing that we can mention is that Frankenstein, you know, however, because of whether his own selfishness, whatever, his loving family was actually kind of destroyed. So they both end up in a similar situation. Frankenstein having lost what was a loving family, but yeah, the creature never having having been loved, and having known people that have had to endure that. It's and having known people that have lost their families. Both of those things are incredibly painful, but they also speak to, I think, what you were saying about the importance of our social bonds. Yeah, I mean, it makes you think twice about othering anything.
Yeah, it's one interpretation is it's a powerful story about prejudice and about connection with others.
It's about human connection, period. And I think, well, not just that, but I think there are a lot of different themes, but it definitely reaches you.
Jeannie, your thoughts?
I think actually it's really common to feel unloved, and it's actually one of the regular developmental things that all kids go through, because even if I mean, I've seen the most privileged of all people who have their childhood trauma, which something happened, and they didn't get the love that they needed, and and they carry that for the rest of their lives. It should be funny. It really isn't, in a way, because I think it's actually a very common thing. We all share that feeling, but I think everybody feels like they're not getting enough love as much as they should.
I'll just quickly go through the rest of the themes I identified. Criminal justice comes back again in France, and then in the story of William's murder, and maybe in other places, the power of literature with all the books that Frankenstein, that the creature learns from. Then the Creatures Requisition, the story of the murder of William, the promise, Frankenstein's promise, Dante's iron cowl and hypocrisy. I like Doug's comments about how Frankenstein's can be interpreted as hypocritical, and that maybe that line, as many of Mary Shelley's lines, you might on first reading think, oh, what is that for there? But very often, if you really get your head around reading the novel closely, you can fit in all these little juxtapositions and hints and delights that Mary Shelley has included that seem like just offhand comments, but are there to give us tools for interpretation in my reading. One thing I really liked at the end here, I believe it's at the end here. No, it's not that far at the end. Yeah. Well, in the 1823, it's chapter 6, and in the 1818, chapter 6 is volume 1, chapter 6. No, I'm in the wrong volume. Volume 2, Chapter 6 is Volume 3, Chapter 1 in the 1818. And where is it? I had it. Oh my. Victor is saying, where are we? I made arrangements for my journey to England, but through the whole period during which I was the slave of my creature, I allowed myself to be governed by the impulses of the moment. How does the creator become the slave of his creature? Is God the slave of humanity? What's going on there? You know, is the creator the slave of the creation?
Sure. I mean, his obsession with actually creating the creature in the first place is single-minded. Never, really contemplated what the creature would be like, what it would experience. Yeah, Madeline, absolutely. I mean, it's
Madeline says, parent is slave
it's
to
a child. Absolutely. I think that there's this obsession where sometimes it's just, yeah, I think that he didn't consider anything other than his own personal desire, whether it would be, to be an acclaimed scientist, or whether he wanted the creature for himself. And yeah, so eventually the creature did end up dictating it. He was a slave to the creature because it consumed the rest of his life, and including murdering his family, essentially, in one way or another. His wife, William. So yeah, he was ultimately a slave to his own invention. I didn't want to call it the creature an invention, but
his own creation.
His own creation. Thank you. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point.
We talked about the travel log a lot.
Right.
We talked about the DeLacy, the blind DeLacy, talking about the hearts of men are full of brotherly love and charity. We talked about the creature's alienation. I had a quote, but I think I gave the wrong page. So I don't know what quote I had in mind.
But it's conditional, though, whatever, the hearts of men. That's kind of right then and there is that's tragic in and of itself.
I found the quote. I guessed I meant page 86, not 76. In my, now that's chapter 4. Chapter 4 in the 1823 corresponds to chapter 8, volume 2 in the 1818.
Are you talking about the Dante quote?
No. When the monster is making the request, he's telling, how am I to direct myself to you, my creator? From you only could I hope for succor. Although towards you I felt no sentiment but that of hatred. Unfeeling, heartless creator, you had endowed me with perceptions and passions, and then cast me abroad an object for the scorn and horror of mankind. I thought that quote captured the alienation. So, final thoughts. Anyone want to leave us with some final thoughts? Final comments?
I think Doug got dumped out and he said the meeting won't let him back in.
Ooh.
Is it turning up anywhere, like in the waiting room or anything?
No, I did. I've been looking for him in the waiting room and I don't see.
I don't see him.
Yeah. So tell him, well, he posted a comment.
No, you're on the email. You sent an email.
Okay. Yeah, I'll respond after the meeting. I don't know how to get him in.
Well, about that last quote, I remember, saying to my mom, why did you have me? And I wish I hadn't done that. But, at the time, why does it's sort of similar in that, I mean, she could have, used birth control or, she could have not had me if she really, really had decided not to. But, after the fact, it wasn't really like, well, I guess I'll have Jeannie and then, see what happens. No, it's like, it kind of comes about, but after the fact, you're responsible, and you're stuck.
Unless you eschew that responsibility like Victor does.
He can't though. He can't get away from it.
He can't get away from it, but he abandons the creature immediately. He looks at him and says, "Oh my God," and runs away to bed, and
But he doesn't get rid of them.
Right, and that may be one of the most profound points of the novel, is that you create something and it is yours even if you can't stand it. Yeah. Because you won't be able to get away from it.
There was one time I remember there was a drama that I was watching, and he said, he said, I remembered the day I found out my father was a jerk, and I'm being kind by saying that. And then he said, I can't imagine the day, what it must feel like when to know that you raised one, and that you're responsible for one, because like one, you're not responsible for who your father is or whatever, but yeah, you are responsible for your creation.
Yeah, I mean, I know people who, if their kid is in prison, this is it's a common feeling that, why did I do that?
Well, now that rapists are, the children of rapists are forced to be born as children, it makes you wonder where that responsibility of the, should we charge rapists with patrimony fees and whatnot? Some states are now saying that rapists are supposed to have their children born, but who's to finance it? I don't know of any state that has raised a law that, if you participate in the creation of something, and the woman is obliged to carry that to term, well, is the father responsible also for carrying it to term? Through financial or, what are those responsibilities?
Madeline has her hand up.
Oh, I missed that. Madeline, go ahead.
Well, there's mandatory child support, which they might go to jail for.
Right.
They don't pay, even though they may not go to jail for rape. Another option would be, along with the mandatory child support, is just start doing a genetic record of every, excuse me, of everyone who's born with an XY chromosome set or any kind of Y chromosome, so that the fatherhood of the child could always be determined. Since they're already, I think infants are already hand printed and footprinted, I'm not sure. At birth, it would be a simple matter to simply collect a DNA swab and add that to the records. That way the men would be at least identified, if not held legally accountable.
I know that
Yeah,
guy.
I think that's the future. I think that's going to happen.
You missed
So-
it, Doug. We really just nailed it just now. The whole entire.
I don't know about that. We were talking in general about the responsibility of being a creator. And sorry you had technical difficulties. We were at the point of final thoughts. Does anyone else have any final thoughts before we sign off?
You're on mute, Doug. Doug, you're on mute.
Now, the link for today's meeting disappears at 4 o'clock. It just disappeared. I couldn't get it. But then I went to the link for the next meeting. I scheduled a reservation, and that link got me in. And Madeline communicated with me that you were still going. So I found a way. So
Thank
final
you,
thought.
Madeline.
I'll let somebody else go first. I'll try to figure out.
Yeah, why don't we do a go round? Jeannie, this section of the novel, what would be your closing remarks?
I'd just say, you know, I read this on my own several years ago, and it had a huge impact on me in terms of thinking about pretty much what we were ending with, you know, the responsibility of people to their creations. And but I didn't see it in the same way as I do now. So it's interesting to look at it more in depth. I mean, a monster is a monster. Sometimes you can just take that as a given, and maybe that's wrong.
Mike, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with the end of this section of the novel?
Well, considering the time strain, I would have looked for a different ending. I think it could have been into
Let's
something.
not talk about the ending.
Okay,
No
that's
spoiler.
that's just my thoughts.
That's next session, the ending.
Next session is the ending. We can talk about the ending next time. Any thoughts about this section where we get the creature's requisition and Victor's promise and travel to England and starting the work to create a female companion?
Did he had the thought? Has he had the thought experiment of why I'm never going to do this again? Yet that's later. Okay, that was the that part impressed me, and I also expanded on that. But I think you guys have covered more than I would have ever thought of in this thing. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
No, I mean, I think it's a very, I think it's a very interesting thing. I thought exploring this idea of being isolated, what it's like to be isolated, and for Frankenstein to actually have a glimpse, or not Frank, I'm sorry, the creature to have a glimpse of what it would be like to be loved, to be part of something, is very powerful. And I think it's, you know, it's perhaps one of the most moving parts of the book, and that realization that, you know, that where he came from, that he was abandoned, and his reaction to it is also, I think, you know, was a very interesting exploration of that. And also Victor Frankenstein's overall behavior in this part of the book in particular seems to be very interesting, to say the least. You know, he puts, as Doug started, he put everybody at risk, and he didn't necessarily worry about what the consequences were, you know, essentially, with even if in the process of creating another monster, he put people at risk with lies, you know, and he does that throughout the novel. He's incredibly selfish, and he ends up as alone as the creature himself. And I think that's something to consider, and it's moving.
Thank you. Madeline, what thoughts would you leave us with?
Well, to me, the section really is about mating. That seems to be the big theme, is Victor and his father discussing Elizabeth. There were Safi and the DeLacy son. And there was the mating ritual of the fair maiden fleeing through the woods and being rescued, which the creature mistakes for an assault. Although the first reading, I thought it was an assault, and then I reread it, I was like, no, I don't think so. And then finally, there's the request, the Creatures Requisition, as you call it, and the sense of constant delays in it all. The delays between Victor and Elizabeth, the delays between Safi and the son. Certainly a long delay for the monster. Can't believe I said that again. For the creature to wait for his ideal mate, because Victor is busy procrastinating all the time.
Thank you. Doug, your thoughts you would leave us with?
Well, I was thinking just before I got cut out the last time about the idea of the creator of a piece of artwork or a scientific discovery and how that operates in the world. We talked about the sorrows of young Werther causing a rash of suicides throughout Europe. And this seems to, by this point in the novel, his procrastination seems to be some dread that, you know, of what will happen if he follows through on his commitment and what will happen if he doesn't follow through on his commitment. So there's a huge amount of sort of double-edged dread, you know, damned if he does, damned if he doesn't. So, oh, the one other image was the blasted tree. There's some point where he actually, in this section, very near the end, says, "I am the blasted tree," which he, you know, refers to earlier, where he witnesses the power of electricity obliterating a tree. And then by the end of this section, he's saying, "I am the blasted tree," which was interesting. A fragmentary element, but interesting.
Madeline says she noticed it. I had not noticed that, which gets to, this novel has so many little clauses, so many little pieces that when I'm reading it, I meditate on many of them, but I can't meditate on all of them. You can only pick so many. And this model of interpretation I've been sharing, this idea that we pick and choose what to be considered in what way, that we filter and focus our perceptual lenses and the ordering of our conceptual scaffolding, what ideas we bring to a piece of writing shapes what kind of interpretation we might take from it. And the art of meditating on those little clauses like the blasted tree or any, Dante's iron cowl or the criminal justice system reprieved, or who was I? What was I? How is a person created through social bonds? All these little elements that your interpretive faculty might draw out and then try to piece together. And then when I reread it, I've now read it carefully twice. I'm reading it a day or two before very carefully, and I add and pick up and reformulate my interpretive constellation of what's to be considered and how is it to be considered. And this novel, it seems to me, better than most novels I've read, just has so many evocative details that can formulate a multitude of interpretations. And that's, I think, why we're still reading it 200 years later to finally answer Madeline's question. So
there's one other thing that I just thought of that actually, in a way, the creature's desires were formed in this part of the book. Like all of a sudden, what he was missing out of. All the the idea of family, these idea of social connections, and that it was learned. Before that. And that's what's that?
Through books and through watching the delay.
Through yeah, and that's a very profound point, is that we learn what we're missing out on by what we're witnessing. Before that, Frankenstein, the idea this he had this instinct that he wanted to be accepted, but this idea of a family, this idea of a mother, this idea of a father, and finding out his origins, about how he actually came into existence. It really, this is what he's actually forming him. And it's interesting to see what he was like prior to that versus after that. Then there's a lot of theories that go into that. A lot of sociological theories that go into that we only desire what other people have, not necessarily what we naturally want. Not only what we naturally want, but it's interesting. I just thought of that.
Any other final comment? In 2 weeks, on September 18th, we come back with finishing the 1818 or 1823 version of the novel. So we'll be able to talk about the novel in its full entirety for the first time. And those who are as excited as I am in digging into this more, we're going to read the 1831 edition starting in October. And even rereading the same edition, I get so much more interpretive leverage. But then with the 1831 edition, we will have some textual changes that can add to our interpretive effort. So thank you, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay,
Or sooner.
or sooner, yeah.
Thank you, CJ. Thanks,
Yeah,
everyone.
thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Thank you, Doug, Mike, Joe, Jeannie. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.